Mark Whipple here from Pinnacle Strategies. Today I'm going to talk about the 12 elements of effective project execution, essentially what we call the project execution maturity model. The project execution maturity model, if I can make my slide work. There we go. The project execution maturity model consists of 12 elements. I think that's 12. Each one with what I would consider a different layer of performance, and we use this execution maturity model to improve project performance systematically. The first level we call basic collaboration. This is fundamentals. How do we execute? How do we work together? I'll go into each one of these elements here in a minute, but you can see them on the screen there. Collaborative execution, functional alignment, priority control, and controlling work in progress. The next level is called basic or improved coordination, which builds on those behaviors, and then finally integrated planning and scheduling. And I'll talk about each one of these in turn here in a second. Oh, well, I even have a video or a little graphic here to explain what it is. What the execution maturity model does is provide a systematic way to integrate the three major project management processes of planning, executing, and then controlling to form a closed loop feedback. The first level of the project execution maturity model really has to do with execution and control. We don't get too concerned about planning because we want to make sure that if we have a plan, we can actually execute. And we find that there's often a lot of low-hanging fruit in this level. So we want to focus first on the team going fast as possible, building reliability into the process and predictability, taking the noise out of the system, focusing on the work that is before the team and at the present. So we don't worry too much about what's coming at us as much as can we execute what's in front of us. So I think of it this way. Before we worry about cooking a meal, let's make sure that we can actually consume the one that we have in front of us. The big problems that we're solving here, and I hate to read these slides, but the first one is just a lack of direction. And most of the time when we go in and work on projects, we find that there's a lack of direction there. There's no systematic or formal way of knowing what's the right way to go for the team or the team members. Who's responsible for what is not always known. Things go really slow. And so that's why we use the term basic here. It's answering these most fundamental questions. Where's the work? What's the status? Are we moving ahead? What do we need to do right now? And importantly, who is going to do it? And I've worked in a lot of projects and I can tell you stories, but I'll get into that in a minute. The outcomes that we're looking for here in the basic collaboration is we're seeing reductions in project duration, increases in productivity, right? Because we're using the same amount of people, so we're more productive. Better accountability, better clarity, and much better visibility into what the project risks are. A lot of times we don't know if we're in trouble until the last minute, and what we're doing in basic collaboration is giving some very basic information about where are we, what do we need to do, are we in trouble, do we need to move resources, and to essentially break down barriers in the decision-making process in the execution of projects. And once we've mastered that, here we can manage the work that we have and we've proven that we have, then we can start with remote collaboration and bringing others who aren't physically present into our team, and we can start to focus on things like how do we deliver on time, how do we promise and hit a specific date. So at the beginning, we're just talking about can we go and forward systematically? Can we go fast? Can we go at any speed at all, right? And we start thinking about schedule and schedule risk, and using buffers and that sort of thing in this level of maturity in the improved coordination. And here we start getting out of the work that is in front of us, and we start paying closer attention to the work that's coming at us. We start metering work, we start making promises, and we start doing some really basic resource management. And at the beginning, we're not too concerned about resources. We're just concerned about, can we work together? Can we get organized? Now we're starting to get in that added layer of decision making and complexity. And I've got this graphic here of the planning, controlling, and executing here for a reason. The first part we're talking about, just executing and controlling. And here we're moving into integration and integrating our planning process with our execution and starting to close the loop between planning and execution and planning, and using our plans to inform execution, and using our capabilities, which are discovered in execution, to inform the plans that we make, so we can do a better job of making plans and having a more reliable delivery process. The big thing that improved coordination solves is the on-time problem, all right? But also what we're working on is improving the response time to risk. If there's a problem, what we're doing is we are trying to reduce that time to respond. And when that happens, then we see projects will start to pick up pace, and then we'll also see a reduction in project lead times. All right? So when we see these slides, what I'm pointing to are, these are the problems that we're solving. These are the outcomes, right? So we start to see things where we're getting, when we are successful in achieving this level of maturity, what we see is we're managing time much more effectively. We're resolving problems early, right? And we see much more transparency and visibility into our project delivery system. Now, once we've done this, right, so now we're dealing with, if you think about improved coordination, we're focusing on schedules and, we're basic bottleneck management, and really focusing on, maybe the next, we'll call it the next 90 days. Then we can move into, once we know the constraints, once we know what our resources are and what our capabilities are, then we can really start to focus in on the planning process and using the information that we gather during execution to create a good plan. And we can really start getting into capacity management and, figuring out what resources are needed and when. And then we can also start to bring subcontractors into our process. At this time, when we've achieved this level of execution maturity, we're pretty good at managing at planning and delivering our work. Now we can go and we can pull in subcontractors. And we put this at the very top because we don't want to bring our subcontractors in to our own confusion. So we save it for one of the very last things to do. And I found that subcontractor integration is probably one of the most complex problems to solve, simply because of the traditions of managing business relationships and the way that contracts are done and that sort of thing. And I'll get into that in a minute. The problem that we're solving here with integrated planning is full integration of resources across the entire portfolio, preventing surprises, and really focusing more on cost and schedule and resource allocation in a more strategic way rather than a tactical way. And what we see is when we achieve this, we get another reduction in cycle time, we get another reduction in product costs, and we get better delivery reliability. And what our experience implementing the execution maturity model across organizations is that as we move through, there are actual revenue and profit numbers, productivity, throughput. You can pick your metric on each level of the execution maturity. So at the very beginning, we're just focusing on productivity and throughput, and then we start focusing on on-time delivery, and then we can start focusing on competitive advantage. So the execution maturity model gives us the ability to grow our capabilities in a systematic way, and also to identify where the strengths and weaknesses are in our delivery process, so we can be focused in our improvement practices and performance improvement. So what I'm going to talk about next is each one of these elements. All right, so this is the long part, and I'm going to go through each one of these and show how each one of them fit together, and how they will, how one serves another, and why we put them in the sequence that we put them in, and why we typically don't we don't start with a plan, we start with the execution. So let's just start with collaborative execution, and we'll talk about the very bottom in basic collaboration. And typically what we're taking as an input here is the action plan, the performance data, our process obstacles, and our functional goal conflicts. All right, so we know what those are, and the collaborative execution process helps us discover what those are. And out of that, all right, what we get is a defined process. We know what our work in progress is. But actually, this is actually backwards. What we start with is a process definition. So I just realized this is slide. So what we start with, defining the process, and that usually takes the form in a visual project board and value streams. And the work in progress, where is it? Work, and defining our deliverables, and then roles and responsibilities. What's the value creation process, and who owns it? And out of that, we get action plans, we get performance data, we get the process obstacles, and we get the functional goal conflicts. All right, so here's a presenter tip. Don't be a slave to your slide. I just changed this before this recording so you can see that, let that be a lesson to you. So what we're doing, working with a collaborative execution, that one little block, is just getting people to work together to achieve a shared objective. All right, so it's basic teamwork. All right, so we're figuring out what's the work, what are the deliverables, what does it look like, who's accountable, what's the status, are we moving ahead, what do we need to do to move forward. So I think of this as informed collaboration, where the individuals and teams are looking beyond their own workload, but they're starting to see how their work affects other people in the project, and provides a shortcut to where are we. All right, so the collaborative execution gives us a collaboration tool, so we don't waste time. Wasting time is probably too strong, but we're not spending our time figuring out where are we. We already know where we are, so we can just move ahead and do something, right? And we can clarify who is responsible for what, so there's no confusion about, do I have that, or do you have that, who's going to do that? And we're really focused on what needs to be done today, rather than what's done in the past, right? So what we find is that, when people are focused, if we don't implement these processes, is that people are really slow in responding to problems, because they don't know, typically they don't know whose it is, what it is, where it is, what's the right priority. And of course that means that the projects are slow, all right? And the overall project durations are increased. Project teams spend so much time focusing on the past and what has been done, And these project meetings are focused on reporting history rather than developing a strategy for moving ahead. So the collaborative execution process is really driving the team to move in that direction, to get away from reporting on the past and focus on the future. All right. So, we have to have an accurate shared assessment. So we use visual portfolio boards, visual boards, so everybody shares, this is where it is, this is the work, and then we also know who is responsible for it. And we follow, very simple process, just plan, do, check, act. I mean, it's not, this is not rocket science, but it is a systematic way of thinking about how can I build collaboration. The simple fact is that you can't manage the work if you can't see where it is. And in many organizations, we're trying to manage a team, we're asking the team to manage the work, and they simply don't know what the work is. They only know what's on their desk. They don't know what's coming at them. They don't know how does it fit. So it's very difficult to get full collaboration out of the team because they can't see. It's like a team of ball players that they can't see what's happening on the field. They can see maybe the ball when it shows up in their little quadrant, but they just can't see the entire field. So that the idea is that we show the entire field, we make it obvious, right? We make it obvious. Where are we? Where are we going? What do we need to do now? Everybody knows, right? And then we start to focus on how do we work together, right? And we get the team to change the conversation, to focus on what is slowing or stopping process, right? So rather than talking about what has happened or who was at fault or what went wrong, let's talk about what do we need to do to move ahead, all right? And we're only investigating the issues, right? What are the red issues, right? The things that are stopping us. So by default, what we're doing is we're setting a priority system that says, hey, if it's stopped, this is the top priority. Everybody has to be focused on this. We know what needs to be done. And we are turning our attention away from the people on the team to the work of the team. So in our collaboration process, what we're teaching people is what do we need to do, not who, why is it there, and what went wrong, right? How does, we ask what we need and how does it affect our project delivery day? And we try to identify what those next steps are and not fix issues. So we have a stand-up meeting, and I like stand-up meetings because stand-up meetings are short. We try to identify those next steps, and we don't really resolve the issue. What we do is we assign someone to resolve that issue. Everything is about action. Everything is about action. Every time we leave a meeting, you do this, I'll do that, she'll do this, she'll do that, and tomorrow we'll meet again. These collaboration sessions, in the agile world, they call them stand-ups, but the truth is that people have been doing stand-up meetings for generations. I've been around long enough to know that stand-up meetings are not new, but people fall out of the discipline of doing it. So, if you are successful, when you are successful with collaboration and achieving this behaviors, all right, what you're going to see is a quicker response to project problems, faster project completions, and reduction in project lead times. And often what you see is just that by itself produces a win for the team. Just that. And it's not, we don't have to have any software or anything. We just have to do that. So once we've achieved this, then we can start to work on the next level, right? We can start to work on functional alignment, right? So we're going to take those outcomes, the action plans, the performance data, the process obstacles that we get in our daily meetings, and what we're going to get is subordination of action. What we're looking for here is for people to subordinate their day-to-day activities to the value creation process. In other words, we want people to set their agenda on what's going to make our projects go faster, not what makes people feel better. And we also will get insight into our behavioral processes, what's wrong, what's right, and we start to get some process governance information. All right, how do we escalate? What if there's a problem? What if something doesn't work, right? And that's what happens. So functional alignment is really about making sure everybody that is on the team is on the team. Everybody has a common goal. We don't have purchasing working against construction or marketing fighting engineering. Everybody's working together. Here's the goal. It's clear. You do this, you do that. And these are the rules that we're going to follow. Right? So this is what I mean by we're subordinating the agenda of the individual to the objectives for the team. That's the goal of functional alignment. Oh, I've got a slide here, right? So what we're doing here essentially is establishing some formal measurements that create the right behavior, that help us track progress, that give information to monitor and to improve the system, right? So what we're looking for are concrete, objective measures of what are we doing. So we're starting to gather more information, and also having metrics and putting a number. Everybody owns a number, helps us clarify the accountabilities. Now, if you don't, all right, what you see, all right, the reason for this is that projects, and well, like it says right there, you know, people live in silos, right? So it's difficult often for management to know the impact of their decision on the overall system. So management classically struggles with identifying and implementing appropriate responses to their system's performance, and measurement systems often reinforce action that, when obeyed, actually harms system performance. So by establishing a measurement system that clearly shows the impact of local decisions on the overall system performance, management decisions can be quantitatively linked to the company's throughput and actual performance. So by removing measurement systems that focus action on local optimization at the expense of global performance, so real growth and improved performance will be achieved. That's our objective. Now, what we want. Now, well, I was going to go here. The underlying thought here is that what we're doing in projects is shaping behavior, right? And, you know, managers at the core are influencers of behavior. What needs to be done is done by people, and managers are always exerting influence to increase some behavior, decrease some behavior, initiate new behaviors. And whether you're improving quality or increasing productivity, it's the behavior that drives the change. So what you have to be thinking about is, if you're going to change the performance of your projects, is you have to change the behavior of your team. So if your projects are underperforming, it's not because you have bad projects, it's not because you have bad people, but you do have bad behaviors. And our approach is really based on behaviorists. The idea of metrics are based on the behaviorist Aubrey Daniels, who says that, you know, motivation is really about people will do what they do because of what happens to them when they do them, right? So, you know, if you're a girl kissing a guy, that feels pretty good, so you want to do that. And if you're a guy kissing a girl, that feels pretty good, so you want to do that more, right? So it's sort of if it feels good, I'm going to continue to do it. If it feels bad, I'm going to stop doing it. And this is generally the most basic level of motivation. Now, if you think about it, behavior essentially behavior is the function of consequences. When something happens, people ask, well, why did they do that? We look for a cause or a precedent, and what happens before the behavior. What's the motivation? Was an internal force, was a need or a desire, or some external thing, right? And so behaviorists, right, Aubrey Daniels is one, don't look for the reward or the consequence. So what they look for is, what I mean is behaviorists look for the consequence. They don't care what is in people's mind. What they care about is what is the consequence, right? So as a result, if we can look at consequences, we can look at outcomes, and we have everything that we need to understand people's motivation, right? We can see, okay, what's the behavior? What's the consequences of that behavior? And we know. Dr. Ellie Goldratt, famously said, show me how you measure me, and I'll show you how I behave. And if you measure me in an irrational way, don't complain about irrational behavior. So the insight here is that measurements are really the key to shaping behavior. Your measurement system, both formal and informal, is the key to shaping behavior in the organization. So you think about the measurements as your backbone, if you will, of your performance management system, right? Your behavior management system. So we think, all right, what's the behavior we want? What's the consequence, right? How do we know if it's happening? And then what's acceptable? It produces the outcome we want. What's unacceptable? It doesn't produce the outcome that we want. Our job is how do we encourage or discourage, right? How do we encourage the acceptable, discourage the unacceptable? And so this is the idea behind the metrics, behind the scoreboard. What we're doing is we're evaluating each local unit, its performance relative to the overall goal of the system, right? And to maintain that alignment, encourage those behaviors, right? Now, if you don't have it, how do you know if you do or you don't have aligned metrics? Well, are things moving slow? Does it take time to clarify who's going to do what? Do we have a hard time getting resources? That's my favorite, right? Are teams not engaged with your project? A lot of times, the only people that are actually on the project is the project manager. And of course, poor resource productivity. People doing the wrong work, both underskilled and overskilled, and delays in response until the right skill comes up. Now, if you can master this, when you master this, what you get is a reduction in the friction in the organization. So everybody knows what the measurement is. Here's what we're supposed to do. Here's how we're doing. We get everybody knows what it takes to win, and we get to engage people in our process, in our project, which results in better productivity. We get the right people working on the right problem, and they respond quickly. Now, once we have the metrics in place, this is what we have a scoreboard. Here's who does what, and we can focus on controlling priorities. Controlling priorities is about decision making. What comes before what, all right? And this slide I have correct. So we're coming out of this, what we have from the prior step, and what's necessary is we have to have that subordination of action, and we have to have our process governance information. And what we get is we get task activity aligned with the global priorities, and the changes are aligned with global priorities. So part of this is implementing a change management process, right? So what we're striving for is a unified work prioritization system that is used for all projects, all tasks across the organization or across the portfolio anyway, right? When we're dealing with priority control, the thing that we are focusing on is eliminating multitasking, eliminating the starting and stopping, eliminating the last minute changes. So by focusing on priority control, what we get is another bump in productivity because people aren't multitasking. And we know that in every business there are multiple priority systems, and the issue is from an execution standpoint is figuring out, well, who owns or controls those priorities, and who, I'm the guy in the middle in that red dot. I've got people coming at me from 16 different directions, and oh yeah, I know I told you this was the most important thing, but actually the boss says this is the most important thing. And then you got your buddy over there say, hey, help me out here, I'll buy you a drink, or I'll do me a favor, I'll do you a favor, kind of a thing, right? So there's no standard method in many organizations of normalizing priorities or communicating or establishing or resolving conflicts between priorities at the portfolio or even at the project or task level. So what we're focusing on here is to give clear direction to the people who are actually doing the work. What's the most important thing I need to do today? Or maybe today in the next few days, right? To eliminate ambiguity, prevent people from working out of sequence, prevent task switching, and of course increase productivity. Again, from a big picture standpoint, we are aligning that local work with the global priorities. So if you're a portfolio manager and you've got multiple projects, the priority control objective is the tools or the process or we'll call it the structure that you use to manage and control priority. It's clear who sets it, right? And of course there's always conflict in a project about what's the right priority and who gets this resource or who gets that resource. And a priority control process is designed to do that. So when we have good priority control systems, what we see is that the local priorities reflect the global priorities and are used for everything, all projects and tasks. So we've got it normalized across. I think I've talked about this. Priorities are reconciled. All right. So reconciled means if you don't have a way to resolve conflicting priorities, this is where you create it. And you have a clear escalation process. This is really important. You have a person that is responsible for managing project and task priorities. Now, oftentimes that person is the project manager, or maybe it's a scheduler or something like that, or a delivery manager. But the critical thing here is that fourth bullet, you have a person that is assigned for this. And in fact, that goes for everything that we talked about here. There is a person that is going to be responsible. So what you get is the deliverables is a system, you get a communication scheme, and you get a conflict resolution process. Now, if you don't do it, then you're going to get the same kind of chaos that you've got now. You get work that's done out of sequence, plenty of task switching, which results in delays and longer completion times, and of course, the bad effect on priority or productivity. I think I've already talked about this. What if you do it right? Well, you get the work done in an orderly fashion and much less task switching, which results in higher productivity. People are engaged with the work actually gets done, they can work on a task and it gets done. Done. Now, then we move on to controlling WIP. Now, why do we need WIP control after priority control? Because there's so much of it. That's the main thing, right? So we see here we've got value creation process, work in process is known. We have our task activity sequences and changes in work. So these are outputs from collaborative execution and also from priority management, right? So we've got those two as a prerequisite to this. And what we end up with WIP control is we get a steady level of work, right? So we're not overloading the system, and we get work that will progress in an orderly way. And I'll explain what that is in a minute, all right? So when we think about controlling work in process, what we're doing, first of all, is we're controlling the release of the work into the system based on the capacity of the constraint. So by this time, in your execution maturity, you have a pretty good idea of what the bottleneck in the system is. And you know that it's the bottleneck because everybody points to that person and says, hey, everything's late. I won't say that it's necessarily quantified by the numbers, but you know where it is. And the other thing we're doing is we're starting to systematically drive out multitasking into the process. So we're introducing a purposeful procedure to eliminate one of the largest causes of multitasking, what we call clean start. And of course, we've got our priorities, right, that we just established. So we'll have solid priorities and we'll have clean start. Some people call it full kit. And that will make things go even faster. So when we think about the two things that we're managing here, one of them is the amount of work, the volume, right? So make sure our freeway doesn't get overloaded, and also the quality of the work. Can people actually work on it? And to eliminate rework and eliminate one of the causes of starting and stopping, which is typically incomplete packs, right? And of course, what happens if we don't do this? All right, what you get is a highly complex task management, right? Because you've got to have a lot of meetings. Where are we? What's going on? What's missing? Work gets performed out of sequence. Plenty of multitasking, task switching, and your project lead times increase, right? And of course, that results in delays and task completions and people doing the wrong work, so they got to go back and they work stuff out of sequence, and oh my gosh, I got to go back and do it again. Or sometimes we get people that work on things too long, right? And productivity goes down. So if we do it though, if we do a good job of controlling work in process, what you get is a much simpler management system. All right, your system of managing is much simpler. And because it's simpler, your project lead times go down, tasks get completed quickly, rework is reduced, over-processing is eliminated, and productivity improves again. So you get more. So in summary, all right, collaborative execution, working together to achieve those shared goals. Functional alignment, each team member subordinates the overall objectives to the project. Priority control, local work priorities reflect global priorities, and control WIP, work in progress. So the work is released into the system as it is consumed. Now, once we've achieved these four, we've got these four processes in place, and we've got the behaviors, we know what they are. I've just put them in on the slides here, so we know that these processes are happening. Then we can start exporting. We can start to think about remote collaboration and using software or technology to share their work. So you see that here's all of the things that we have on the left. Those are all the outputs, if you will, of basic collaboration. And now we're going to go and we're going to bring those remote people into the house, into the tent, and they're going to do the same thing. So now we have a complete view of the entire team, right? And again, the remote collaboration is, if we don't do it, the big thing is that we have a team that's remote that is not synced up to the local team. And so what happens is people get the wrong priorities, they get the wrong information, resources, all of the things that are on this list. I'm not going to read them to you. You've already read them. When we think about projects, right, and when we're talking about managing a project team, for a remote team, it really magnifies those issues that we have, with just a local team, right? Because if you're in the U.S. and you're working with a team in the Philippines, or if you're in Sydney and you're trying to coordinate with the UK, you often have a very narrow window of time to work with these people, and so that means that the amount of information that you have to communicate is limited. That you can communicate and overcome any is very limited. You don't get the hallway conversations. If your programmer or your software engineer is in Chennai and you're in Belfast, it's you're not going to get a hallway conversation, and a lot of the hallway conversations and what about this and what about that kind of things, the drop-in sorts, those conversations cannot happen with a distributed team. So you get this, what I would call a delay based on time zone, right? You get a time zone synchronization problem, all right? And you get this batch communication, right? So the batch communication is, and not everything gets communicated, right? So some people will say, here's 10 items and only 9 get communicated, which also, results in kind of a delay, right? So what we're talking about here is just replicating the work that we've already done beyond the geographic or, beyond our barriers. And I think I've already talked about this. And we're bringing those resources, even though they might be, not geographically present, but we're bringing those people into our team, all right? And we're making them a formal part of our of our project team. So, some things to consider. We've got a mechanism for communication. This is a screenshot of Visum, a tool that we developed for that, all right? And we have to establish a pace, right? So a frequency in, is it daily, weekly, 3 times a week, right? Decide what will be discussed, what's the critical information, and we know this, right? We know this, what the critical information is, because we defined it in our basic collaboration steps, and then we stick to the script. So stick to the script, meaning we're going to have a remote collaboration process. We're going to use the same discipline that we use for local collaboration. When we're meeting, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these issues, and anything else we'll have a separate meeting about that. So we can cover the critical stuff, and the other stuff that requires a deep dive gets handled offline with the right people. Now, if you do it, right, better engagement, situational improvement, situational awareness improves, bottlenecks are identified and broken, and of course you get increased task velocity and quick response to problems. And of course, all the other wonderful things that we would expect, right? Reduced interfunctional conflict, right? So we can't blame the guys in India for our problem, and they can't blame us for their problem. And it becomes simpler to manage, right? It's just easier to manage because you have a process for management. And when we think about this basic collaboration and the execution maturity model, what it is a system to manage your delivery process with well-defined behaviors and well-defined procedures, so you can take this process and scale it. So then we can move into management and bottleneck. Now, if you don't have remote collaboration, if you don't have remote collaborators, then we're just going to go right to managing bottlenecks. And there's all the outcomes from basic collaboration. And what we're getting now for managing bottlenecks is we're getting load to capacity data for critical resources, not everything. So when we think about managing bottlenecks, we're doing some basic fundamental capacity management, but only on the bottleneck resources, right? So we're focusing in our attention on the bottleneck resources, and we're implementing management procedures to closely manage these critical resources because they govern the flow and the speed of everything. And we start moving resources to the most critical work, and we are able to start getting information about. We can actually start implementing a systematic process to improve our project delivery system. Now, of course, what happens? The big thing is what we're trying to do is really increase throughput, right? And create strategies that will increase the output. Now, this is where the role of the project manager shifts from managing the project to improving the process. So typically, project managers don't get too involved in how do I make this process go faster, but I'm saying that project managers are actually an integral function, are an integral part of making the system go faster because they've got information that can improve all projects. And if we can take advantage of that, we can improve the delivery process and start to move towards really dominating our market. So remember, bottlenecks control the process, right? So if they control the process, that's where we're going to focus. We're going to roughly determine the workload for the resources. Now, people get all hung up here, but how many hours is, I've done dollars, I've done pieces, we've done work packages. It doesn't matter what the capacity element or the capacity unit of measurement is, doesn't matter. What matters is that we get something that's close and is workable to get action, right? What we want to be able to do is start building a model that says, here's our capacity and here's what we can actually do so we can start to stagger our projects. So we can make pretty graphs and stuff like that. So we start taking the idea of a bottleneck or constraint resource and we start moving it away from the subjective view of, hey, whose name got called in the last 2 weeks to here's the real numbers for our process. And again, it doesn't have to be, hours, or it could be units, it could be dollars. What matters is you pick something that is representative of load to capacity. And so what once we know what the bottlenecks are, we can look across all the projects and we can roughly determine the workload. We can then, and once we know that, we can align our resource allocation process. We can identify, do we need to hire people or move people around? We can spend money or not spend money. So this is a big step forward in being able to manage our projects and really start to manage in a more strategic way. So up till now, right, we've been dealing with, how do we manage the work that's in front of us and how do we synchronize our execution plan and stuff. And now we're starting to control and manage not only the rate at which work is arriving, but also the rate at which we are completing, because the bottleneck is going to control how fast projects get done. So here I have control now. If I'm the portfolio manager, I've got control over how the rate at which projects are completed. And of course, what happens when you do it? If you do bottleneck management effectively, you will go faster. Things will get done in less time, productivity, costs will go down, revenue goes up, wonderful things happen here. Wonderful things. And we've got lots of case studies. I'm not going to go into them here. All right, now, once we've got the bottleneck and we've got control, then we can start promising deliveries, right? We can get a good enough project delivery based on the critical load, based on project duration, right? And what we're preventing here is overpromising or underpromising. If we overpromise, our customers will be disappointed when we don't deliver on time. If we underpromise, we might not get the work. So having that critical resource information is super important for us to go out and compete in the market and bring work in. Now, when you do it, oh, here it is right here. This is the slide that I just explained to you verbally, all right? Part of the promising is managing expectations too. So what you're doing is you're developing a system for promising deliveries. There's maybe a pre-promise or scoping and matching the resource process that happens. And then when you're promising, you're looking at what happened in the past. I'll give you an example. We were with a company and they thought that their constraint was doing 5 a day. And we started measuring, and actually they were doing 3 a day. And they were thinking, they were making all their revenue promises and all of that stuff based on 5 a day. When they saw what they were actually doing, that resulted in a change of both promising deliveries and also their resource allocation strategy. What we want to be able to do is make delivery promises confidently, reliably. Understand where the project is on the critical chain and roughly identify the capacity constraint backlog. Now, when there's a conflict, there has to be some kind of escalation process, right? So again, we are building a formal process to satisfy the market with the resources that we have, which means we're improving the governance. Now we're focusing on governance. So in the first section, right, we're focusing on the tactical. Now we're dealing with how do we govern this thing? How do we manage it from a big picture standpoint? And this becomes more portfolio management oriented and not task oriented. Wonderful things happen. What do? Well, actually, you get better delivery. If you promise it right and you match your promise according to the capabilities that you have already demonstrated, then of course your reliability improves. And then you're not expediting, you're not chasing your tail. And because you're not doing those things, you get better productivity again because you're not changing your minds and shifting jobs around. And all these wonderful financial things happen once you achieve this. Now, schedule risk is the next level of thinking in terms of how do I manage time. Now, what we're looking for is, the output of this, right, is we get normalized task priorities across all projects. So right now, up until this point, all of our project planning and deliveries are based on kind of a sketch. There hasn't been a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Thought into how we manage our buffers and how do we manage contingency and that and uncertainty in the schedule. So now we're going to the next level and we're introducing this idea of managing uncertainty. So the normalization of project priorities across task priorities, normalizing project priorities, and creating early action on the delivery dates at risk. is a new concept because we're going to be asking people not to react when the project is late, but when we think that the project could be late if we don't act. So we're changing the trigger for behavior. If we don't do it, then what happens is we get a reactionary process, right? We get delay, firefighting, and wasted money because we're overspending. So our objective is to contain, have this situational awareness relative to the overall project schedule performance, and consistently identifying how much work is left versus the time remaining, and taking action before time runs out. So we're always looking at this ratio of work remaining versus time remaining and getting a sense of how much projects risk is in our schedule. So we're focusing here primarily on the schedule risk, and we're using schedule risk because schedule risk also drives the spending risks as well. So what we're doing here is we're establishing and managing delivery dates. We're improving task duration estimation processes. All right, we're separating essentially the separation of work from contingency, adding time buffers into the plan, and we're managing that time. So at this level, we're introducing a new level of sophistication to the projects and to the project teams, and a new layer of competency, if you will. Now, in brief, you have to understand that uncertainties are inherent to our project work, right? If we don't manage that uncertainty, then the uncertainty will manage us, right? We'll be always, reacting. So the only way to be prepared is to explicitly state what the uncertainty is. We know that on a good day, it's going to take us X amount of time to accomplish a task, but in a project, who knows? It's weather, it could be a supplier, it could be it's engineering content, technical content, it could be anything that creates uncertainty about how long a task would take. And it doesn't matter what the source of that uncertainty is, but what matters is that we separate the known from the unknown, and we actively manage both in the context of a schedule. So we know how much work is going to happen, but we also know how much uncertainty is there, right? And so in order to get our plans, now we're moving towards a planning approach that focuses on breaking out that work from safety. And that means that the buffers, those time buffers, have to be available for people to use when there's a problem, and we can't punish them when there is. And so this is the foundation of schedule risk. Now, here are two projects, Project 1, Project 2. We can see that in Project 1, we're working right here at the fourth task. We have 3 tasks left that are 5, we'll call it days, and we have 15 days of our buffer, and it looks like we've used maybe a third of that. Right here, wait a second, I've got some numbers right here. Here we go. We've consumed our buffer 60%, our project is completed 50%. In Project 2, we have more work to be done, all right? We've consumed 20% of the buffer, and we've completed 33% of the project. So one of these projects is going to get a higher priority than the other, right? And that project is going to be Project 1, because we're using more buffer, 60%, than we are completing work. Project 2 is actually looking good, right? We've completed a third of the project, and we've only consumed 20% of our buffer. So Project 1 will get priority over Project 2, even though there's less work. Now we can also take this to the task level as well, right? So we can take it and say, all right, here, this task right here, it's schedule risk. We can assign that value is 0.83. This task, its schedule risk is 1.66. So we can take this ratio and we can assign a number to a task and then create a priority. So we can take these numbers and we can apply them at the project level, at the portfolio level, and say this project goes ahead of this one. And we can also normalize our priorities across the tasks. And the only software that does this is critical chain software. I'm lying to you. Visum does this, and Visum is based on the critical chain principles. So the idea is that we want to get people out in front, right? Get better decisions and accelerate. Right? So if you see how this execution maturity model is progressing, you can see that we're moving from simple to more complex to more sophisticated techniques, and we're using the data that we receive or the outcomes from the prior step as the input to the next step. Each one is geared to reducing or eliminating an obstacle for speed or for reliability. Now, once we've got schedule risk, we know where the bottleneck is, and of course we can't do schedule risk if we don't know where the bottleneck is. We can't do schedule risk if we're not doing delivery promising. So once we've got this done, then we can move into managing dates. Everything gets managed by the dates. Now, this is really a simple thing, but I put it here because most project organizations do not have a procedure to manage the date. See, we're predicating everything here on the date. What's the date? The date is the date that the customer expects their project to be done. Now, at the beginning, somebody puts a date, and we're using ERP systems and that kind of stuff, and that date is going to be driving all the priorities throughout the system. So as a primary driver, it has to be managed. Somebody has to own it. So what we're doing is we're taking our good enough dates, our task activity sequences that are aligned. We're taking our changes, our change management process, and we're bringing it into this date management process. And as a result, what we're going to get is everything in the IT systems, all our IT, ERP, project management systems all have the same information. And all of our reporting is also unified. We get a single point of priority control. So you remember that slide I showed you earlier where I had like 20 people setting priorities? Here we have 1 point of priority control. So priority control is so critical. You want to have a person that owns these dates. Now, in a manufacturing organization, that person is typically has the title of a master scheduler. In most project organizations, that role does not exist. So you want to think about who is going to be my date manager. Maybe it's your maybe it's your portfolio manager. It doesn't matter who does it as much as it is that it is done. All right, so we are protecting the integrity of our priority system using date management. Right, now if we don't, right, what we get is we get too many intermediate dates. All right, and of course what happens is if we don't manage our dates, our milestone dates and our target dates, people get confused about, well, what is this and what is that and when is this? So for example, we did a project where we worked with a company. They had one test where they had final assembly testing. All right, and that was an important milestone. And then they had system integration testing, and that was another important milestone. And then they had another one for delivery, and then they had another one for installation. So they had one project had 4 to 6 dates, and once it went in the system, nobody was really managing it, and so the team was really struggling with what is the right date. What date should we be managing to? And so the managing delivery dates process is designed to take that ambiguity out of the system, right? They become the sole driver, right? So, part of it is, in order to do it, that person has to know what the customer, they have to be fed the right customer expectation. So no lying, I say no lying, typically, the sales guy gives the wrong date to protect what he thinks is bad performance by operations, and rightly so. But what that does is that creates confusion about, well, what is the real expectation for the customer? And that date usually doesn't come out until much later. And then people are doing the wrong things. Anyway, so the delivery date management has to do with, synchronizing the customer expectations, and then maintaining the dates in the IT systems, whatever those are, sales orders, CTRs if you have those, whatever your work management system is, and then managing those contract dates, right? So, and I think I've talked a little bit about this, but the milestone and integration dates are set, way in advance, right? And then once the contract dates are done, then what happens is, there's weather, the contract gets delayed, the customer is delayed. And so somebody has to do this, right? Somebody has to maintain the synchronization with the customer. So you think about date management, it's really not necessarily, it's marshaling the information from the project managers or the customer relationship managers and bringing that information together to form a systematic way of managing those dates, right? And, how do we manage them is, I've seen the dates and statements of work around multiple systems. There's the contract, then there's the sales order that goes in the ERP system, and then there are the work orders that are created out of that. Then there's the work breakdown structure, which then feeds the project plans, which may or may not be, and then there's the local work instructions. So all of these dates have to be synced up, all right? And that's what this is designed to do. And maybe I'm over-explaining this. And what happens when they're out of alignment is, it's, as I said, it's difficult to identify the customer requirement, and priorities get distorted, and the work gets done in the wrong sequence, and milestones are late, and, revenue is lost, right? Customers get disappointed, or stuff doesn't get delivered on time, and then you spend a lot of money, bringing it back on schedule, quote unquote. And of course, that bullet, the very last one, is we spend money too early in a project, right? So, at the core, what we're doing is we're assigning accountability, and we're integrating our priority control systems and risk management system processes to this. So we're setting that master button, right, for our projects and portfolio. And of course, what we're avoiding is priority shifting, multitasking, reducing task synchronization errors, and we're making things go faster because we're working on the right stuff. And if we work on the right stuff, the customer is happy. So in summary, the improved coordination is remote collaboration. If you have remote teams, it's essentially getting that remote team up and running to your basic collaboration level. Then we start on bottleneck management. All right, this is quantifying the bottleneck, measuring it, figuring out where are we, how much capacity do we have, what's the load, and then once we know that, then we can move into delivery promising based on the capacity constraint. And then once we've got that, then we can start really thinking about managing uncertainty in projects and start separating the work from the system. And all of these then, and then there's delivery date management, which is aligning those dates in the IT systems. And all of these then set the stage for integrated planning and execution, right? Fully closing the loop and entering into probabilistic planning, capacity management, and subcontractor integration, and you start really focusing on strategic planning across a portfolio, life of the project, whatever the wavelength is. And what we're looking to do is to take resources, share them across projects, make the right risk management decisions early, right? Because when we make the decisions early, they're cheap. Allocate resources, figure out what we need and where early, right? And of course, what happens is we get a reduction in cycle time, reduction in cost, and I should have put happy customers on there. But again, this is all about PDCA, plan, do, check, act. That's all it is, right? So we're now doing the planning phase, right? So probabilistic planning is an extension of what we were doing before. It's taking the alignment of delivery dates, our single point of priority control, our task definitions, and our estimated task durations, using that, breaking out the work, and then we're doing a standardized planning process. All projects get planned using the same methods. We're establishing risk mitigation plans. We're and executing risk mitigation plans, right? We are doing capacity management at a much more granular level. And maybe that is across geographic boundaries or whatever you decide, right? So I call this a first world problem. If you are here, you definitely have first world problems, right? Because you're trying to figure out which projects have the greatest risk. How do I deal with the complexity? Because a project plan could have 3,000 items on it, right? And how do I manage the integration of the various projects across different work streams? And we don't know what the critical chain is, all right? We don't know where our future risk is. We know better. We know sort of, kind of, but only in a very fuzzy kind of way. And I think that what we're looking for here is the opportunity. Where's the opportunity? So we're moving above. When we are in this level of planning, we are beyond the day-to-day. We're thinking about 6 months from now, a year from now, however long our project, whatever our backlog is for project completion. We're thinking, all right, what should we go after? Where are our resource strengths? Where are we having the bottlenecks? What kind of projects should we be aggressive on? Those sorts of things. Well, what's the opportunity to go out and capture more market share? And then, on the execution side, we can say, okay, well, what do we do about Parkinson's law? Do we have any available capacity? Are there things that we should be doing to reduce risk? What's making projects longer? What's increasing projects, right? So the probabilistic planning process is really active management of risk, identifying it, mitigating it, integrating it with the schedule, buffer management, identifying those resource conflicts and resolving them. We know what the critical chain is. We're managing the critical chain. And, I have, this wonderful thing here, right, of what's our ROI proposition. And I don't know necessarily that I want to read every node to you. But I think what you want to see here is, look, we build our baseline schedule, then we do the analysis, then we focus on risk reduction, which pushes us to early delivery, better cash flow. If we do our baseline schedule, we do our buffer management, and we're managing changes, we get the actions, and we get reduced cost, so we get both. We get better cash flow, and we get a reduced project cost when we do critical chain project management. Now, remember that probabilistic schedules don't have fixed task completion dates. So we're not managing tasks with specific milestones, all right? We're not managing by milestones. So this is a shift in planning, but also a shift in execution. Excuse me. What we're doing is we're shifting the action the focus of action on risk reduction and our risk register. So we're actually using the risk register. It doesn't go on a spreadsheet anymore. We're actually using the risk register to manage the risk in our projects and getting our projects done, right? So we don't care about when a task is done. We care about how much risk do we have. And in order to get the ROI, in order to get the cost reduction, what we have to have is a plan that the work package managers own. Own meaning we agree, yes, we can do that. We do the job of quantification of risks. So we spend time to figure out, all right, how big is this risk and what's the chance? We actually complete the risk actions before the committed date. We have a relay racer. So what happens here is we do frequent task updates, buffer recovery action, right? So all of these things are about managing risk. So at the beginning, in the early stages, or what we'll call the less mature execution maturity, we're managing the activity, and we're, what's the right thing to do, and here's that, and and all of the work that we're doing here is designed to make it easier to execute, right? So we know that we can execute. Things are going to happen. We've got a reliable system. People are working together. We got the right metrics. Now we're going to take that and we're just going to shift it a little bit, and we're going to start focusing more on changing the activity based on what's stopped and what's critical. We're changing the definition of critical to what tasks, what projects have the highest risk. So we're shifting the emphasis away from dates to risk, which incorporates the date. And so we use the statistical information to derive this task and project durations. I've already talked about this, and we incorporate the project buffers into the plan, and then we create the critical chain, right? And so we all know that the weakest link is always what's determining the strength of the chain. And when we think about managing that, the weakest links, all right, the weakest links are the ones that get our attention. The strongest links get less attention. So this is why the critical chain, when we think about the critical chain in a project, it is the constraint, the weakest link. Essentially, it's the longest sequence of dependent tasks that are in a project, right? So some ways to think about it is it's the critical path with resource leveling, right? Because we're saying dependent tasks, not just technical dependency, but resource dependency. So here we take our project and we say, well, this becomes our critical chain, and then we add a buffer. Now, I don't want to get too deep in here, but the typical conventional project plan takes all of the safety and builds it in and says, hey, we can do this on such and such a date. But the problem is that the typical plans don't call out resource conflicts. So here in this plan, we have a plan that's not feasible because this one, C2 and C3, uses the same resource, the same green resource. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to manage that constraint, fix that dependency, but we don't want to do it by adding more safety, right? What we're going to do is we're going to add the right amount of safety. So the critical chain is starting with aggressive estimates. Now, I estimate tasks at P50, highest, most likely, right? So people get worked up about, well, what is P50, 50% probability? This is the median, it's the safe estimate, it's the most likely outcome for each task, and we start each task as late as possible. So you can see that my task durations are in the plan are reduced, right? Because before they were, what is this, 4 days, 6 days, 6 days, 7 days, and now they're 4 days, 4 days, 2 days, right? So we've taken our durations and we've cut them down to 50%, our safe estimate, and then we create the critical chain, right? So we resolve this has the technical dependency, right? I have to do this before this. Then we add the resource dependency, And we can see that our critical chain goes A, C2, C3, and then I think this is D1, and then we calculate the buffer. So this is our critical chain. This is the constraint, right? Because the time, this is what's going to dictate how long the schedule will be. And we can see then we add our buffer. Now typically the buffer at the beginning is half of the chain length, right? So this is 4, 8, 10, 12 days of work. So I'm going to add 50% of that on a buffer of 6 days. So my total duration looks to be 6 days, well, it's 18 days. And that's where we start. And we might add feeding buffers. Some people say, no, we don't need to add feeding buffers because we have a project buffer, but then we would add feeding buffers and late starts. All right, now, there's sometimes a discussion about how big the buffers will be. I don't want to get involved in this presentation, because what I want to show you is essentially what is the execution maturity model, not how to build a buffer, right? But I want you to understand what is probabilistic planning, right? So the principles here, are that the plan is necessary, but it's always wrong, right? And the task durations have to be aggressive, but possible. And the relationships are guided primarily by technical requirements and not by preference, at least in the beginning, all right? And we account for resource dependencies as well as technical task dependencies, and we make project assumptions and risk estimates explicit, right? We state them out in the open. We don't hide them. There's no hidden buffer. All the buffer is out there for people to see so we can manage it. And the number of tasks in any project is going to be guided by the ability to manage them. And that has an important implication for how big your project network is and how you link them together. I'm not going to get there in this presentation. And then the project due date is always protected by time. And the start of the critical chain tasks are protected by buffers. So this is essentially the probabilistic planning. Now, once we have a probabilistic planning where the work is actually explicitly stated versus the uncertainty, then we've got some good, solid capacity requirements information. So we know, right? We know what the true capacity requirements are, right? Without being distorted by having each task have its own level of safety, right? So we can take that mitigation plan and the capacity requirements and our standardized planning process, and we can choose where the constraint is, and we can make plans on acquiring capacity. We can take our entire portfolio and reconcile it to the resources that we have available. Now, I'm not going to get too involved in capacity management here in the techniques and that sort of thing, right? But what I want to highlight here is that the capacity management process, it can fail because the requirements are not visible and the capacity is not visible, all right? And we aren't using the same resources across all projects. They're not same. We haven't got the same, engineer A in the Philippines is not the same as engineer A in Guangzhou, or software engineer A in Oakland is not the same software engineer that we have in Chennai. So the idea here when we're getting into the capacity management is really about standardizing, all right? And especially across distributed teams, this is really important. So managers need to have a common understanding of what is capacity. So if you notice, we're linking back to the very beginning here, where if we want to have good management, we have to have a common understanding of what are the requirements and what is the work to be done, right? What do we have and how much work is going to be required to get it done? And often we're working in the dark and we need some kind of a mechanism. Now in manufacturing organizations, you have sales and operations planning processes to accomplish this, but in project organizations, they do not have this typically. So that's what, if you think about, if you ever worked in manufacturing before, then you understand what this is about. Secondly, we start to think about reserves. And, in the schedule, we have those time reserves, those time buffers. But in capacity management, now we're thinking about maintaining a buffer of capacity, of how, some reserve capacity to sprint or to surge or to resolve capacity, resolve uncertainty. So this is what the capacity management process is designed to do. Now, once we have these, we've got control over our own knitting, and we are awesome at managing our schedules and controlling and managing our own resources. Now we can start to reach into our critical subcontractors. And so we have all of these wonderful things. I'm not going to read them to you because we've already gone through them. But what you're going to get for subcontractors is you're going to get the same kind of behavior that we had in our teams, where we've got the subcontractors are subordinate to project and portfolio objectives. So we're bringing that subcontractor company that is typically, operating under their own set of rules into our domain, right? And we're going to get action plans, and we're going to get performance data, and we're going to get the process obstacles, and we're going to get functional alignment at the subcontractor. When we think about this, right, what we're trying to do is manage the risk where the risk exists. And so we're working to align the project objectives with the subcontractor objectives. Most of the time, the subcontractor has one objective, and that is to maximize profit. And there's nothing wrong with that. However, the way that contracts are written and projects are written, they are not run in the way that fully aligns that profit motivation with the contract goals. So this becomes the main objective, right? Is we align project objectives, we get the right contractor, they become part of our team, they become part of our risk management, capacity management, and they become part of our team even though they're technically not our team. So, summary. Probabilistic planning is active risk management. Deliverables-based schedules, critical chain project management. The capacity management is a complete capability model, and using capacity as a strategic tool. And then subcontractor integration is bringing that subcontractor in alignment with us, right? And making them part of the team and fully aligned with what we're doing. So that's the 12 elements. Basic collaboration, collaborative execution, functional alignment, priority control, and controlling work in progress. Once we have that, then we can progress to improve coordination. We're bringing other remote teams in, actively managing bottlenecks, promising deliveries, managing schedule risk, managing the dates in the IT system, and then we can really take off and get probabilistic planning with critical chain. We can do capacity management and use our capacity as a strategic weapon, and then we can bring our contractors on board as part of our team and dominate the market. So thank you so much for recording, or for attending this. I'm going to figure out how to make this recording stop. I'm not really sure. Oh, I know how to do it. It's going to be right here. Thanks so much for spending the time with me. Gosh, an hour and a half. Well done. Have a great day.